News consumers in Australia access news less often and have a lower interest in it compared to the citizens of many other countries. In fact, they are more likely to subscribe to Netflix than a news service.
And I figure that's bad news for us.
We're still here.
Now, according to the latest findings of Digital News Report Australia 2019. The report is part of a 38-country survey coordinated by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. Caroline Fisher is one of the authors of the Australian report, and she joins us now from Canberra. Caroline, very good to talk to you.
Hi there.
Yeah, should we be concerned, Laura and myself, given that this is our job you're talking about?
Yes, but you see, you're lucky because the taxpayers of Australia already pay for you. You're not asking them to dip into their pockets a second time, so I think you're probably okay.
That's interesting. So it's what you pay for. So what are the findings then? What is it that Australian audiences, viewers, readers want?
Gosh, well, they're telling us at the moment what they don't want. What they don't want is that they want the news to be less negative. They want it to be more relevant. They think that the media could do a better job of holding people in power to account. They're quite happy with the fact that you guys are keeping them up to date, so they're happy with that. And you're doing a reasonable job at explaining to them the events of the day. But there are issues around relevance and negativity.
So who are the news consumers?
So this survey is an online survey of 2010 Australian adults who are news consumers, and they're also online. The survey is conducted by a company called YouGov. They conduct the survey in all the territories that are part of this global survey. And the survey was conducted in the last week of January and the first week of February of this year.
So does this cover all demographics? And I guess the point I'm getting to is there's often the story that young people, they're just not interested in the news these days. You know, perhaps we look at our own viewership figures that it's an older audience tuning into particularly the TV news.
Absolutely. So we look across all demographics, yes, and our survey is weighted according to the ABS data, so it's representative in that sense. So yes, no, that is absolutely true. Older Australians are much more likely to be watching TV news and use it as their main source of news. Young people, Gen Z, Gen Y, very much social media is their main source of news now. And yes, so it's very much skewed to older demographics, TV.
And in this generation, this era, Caroline, of fake news, as Donald Trump calls it, is there a diminishing of trust in what people are seeing? And does that depend on where you are accessing your news from?
Interesting, yes. So again, people who rely on mainstream traditional brands, so TV and newspapers, they have higher trust in news than people who rely on social media and or online sources of news. And in fact, people who do access news via social media, the trust in that news has fallen over the 5 years that we've been doing the survey. So distrust has gone up and trust has gone down in news on social media. And I think that's a good thing.
So, I mean, as we're seeing at the moment, the news landscape is changing rapidly at the moment. Obviously, we're seeing, with newspapers, reports that they're on their deathbeds, and I guess you can say broadcasters may well be following suit. But as far as the younger generation is concerned, which obviously that's where the future will be, where are they getting the news from? So you're saying it's social media. Are these in sort of those bite-sized chunks? They're not interested in that sort of long-form journalism?
They're getting a variety of types of news on social media. As you know, in your own feed, you'll bump into videos, you'll bump into long reads, and it depends on whether or not you're actually subscribing to news to see on your feed, or whether you're just, bumping into news that is part of your friend's sort of information ecosystem. What we're seeing, though, is that people are increasingly, accessing news, what we call indirectly. So people who go straight to a news website with the intention of accessing news, that number is diminishing, and the people who are just bumping into it accidentally while they're doing other things, so they're on social media to look at a friend's post or whatever, they're bumping into news that way, or they're online for some other purpose and they're finding news that way. So this sort of indirect consumption of news is increasing.
Yeah, it sort of depends how it's curated, isn't it? Because a lot of people would have that app on their phone that curates the news for them, which is really just headlines.
Yeah, well, we are seeing a growth in the use of these aggregated services as well. That's absolutely rising as well.
Does a country's social stability, the leadership, what is happening in the media domain affect people's perception and understanding and requirements for news?
Look, it absolutely does. It's a very big question, and I can tell you that there's lots and lots of research done on this. But yes, I mean, our report does point to this as well. There are big differences between the 38 countries. They're not all similar countries at all. We have countries from all parts of, different continents with different media systems, different political systems. And what's interesting, actually, some of the systems that are less stable, less democratic, they have much higher social media news consumption. And they have low trust in their offline news brands, and they have higher trust in social media brands. And so it really does depend on the specific context of each country.
So what is Australia's then? Because there was political unrest over the last 12 months or so when this was taking place, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, the findings in this year's report, there are some positives in there, but it is unfortunately it's not a very bright picture, and I think that we need to read that in the context of the last 12 months, given that the time that the survey was taken at the beginning of the year, leading up to that, a lot of job losses in the news media, closures, takeovers, instability here at the ABC with the management here. And we also had a lot of political instability. I think, and I think that general sort of tumult is the backdrop that we need to read these findings in that context.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could say there's obviously that leadership turmoil, but overall, would you describe, I mean, is it the fact that Australia is really a stable democracy, and therefore the news in this country is pretty boring?
Right, OK, well, that's your assessment.
Well, look, I'm in comparison with many other countries.
I guess, yes, we're not having, major, we're not having revolutions. We're not seeing what's happening in Hong Kong, for instance, happening here. Mind you, though, we do have press freedom raids.
Yes.
Raids on the national broadcaster and other news organisations. So, things are hotting up here.
But the public aren't necessarily engaged with that, are they?
What we're seeing is that the level of interest in news has been declining over the last 5 years. Now, that could be that people are finding the news agenda less interesting, less engaging, less relevant to them. It could also be that they're more distracted, that their attention is being, diverted because there's actually now such a range of other information sources out there. There's so much to consume. I think it's probably both. I think we're finding that, people are indicating that there is a lower interest in news. They have, highlighted in this year's survey that there are issues around relevance, that, only about 25% say that the news is actually relevant to them. There's a big bunch of people in the middle who say they're undecided about that. They're not sure if it's relevant to them or not. 44% said that they thought that the news was too negative, and amongst the 38 countries, that perception is quite high, even high up there with the UK, and the UK has had a terrible period with Brexit, and a lot of negative coverage in the media. So there's obviously something going on there. We've also had a rise in news avoidance, and that's people who have said, I sometimes, occasionally or often choose to avoid the news. And we asked that question in 2017, and there's been quite an increase in that in the last 2 years in people who are avoiding the news.
There is a good side to this for one company, Netflix.
Yes, indeed, I'm sure that's right. Well, and also any video streaming service. So we did ask people, look, if you just had one choice, you had to choose one subscription service, what would it be? And we gave them a range, including video streaming services, music, online dating, gaming, all sorts of things, and online news. And video streaming services came up trumps. So number one, so for Netflix, Amazon, Stan, anyone who's offering a subscription video service, that was the first choice, overwhelmingly. So 34% I think chose video as their first preference, and only 9% chose online news as their first preference. And even when it came to second choices, music streaming was right up there. Again, news was a poor cousin.
Caroline Fisher, Associate Professor in Journalism at the University of Canberra. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.